Welcome back, everybody. So, as you can see from today's video title, it's Will You Register Your Food? And the reason why I use these words is because as we dip into the case law, as we look at this from a very nomenclature standpoint, case law, legal standpoint, we're going to see that these words are going to become more important as we go out. So, I think it's important that we look at this for what it is, because in reality, this is not clickbait at all. I mean, there's nothing about this title that's clickbait, and that's going to be well articulated as we go through this video. But this is going to be the actual words that we see presented in numerous forms, in numerous texts from a legal liability law perspective, ordinance perspective. So I think it's important we start using them now so we can get a better understanding of what we can see happening both here and the now, and then, in the future, whether that's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, decades, numerous decades. So again, I think it's really important. And we're going to look at this and we're going to frame this from not only the here and now and not only future, but more importantly, I think from a historical precedence. And we're really going to bring everything kind of full, we're going to bring everything full circle. And so I think it's important that we have this conversation. I'm going to be doing many videos regarding food, and they're going to be highly controversial in the ideal that they're going to make people feel uncomfortable. Nothing I'm going to say is going to be factually incorrect. Nothing I say is going to be my opinion. This is just the facts as they're presented to us, and this is just the real case law. This is the real laws. This is reality. Okay. And like I say, I prepare from a solution-based stance. Everything I do is solution-based. Unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of hopeful, wishful thinking, right? And I know you guys have heard me say this so many times in the past, but I can't look at the world for how I want it to be. I have to look at it for what it really is, what it factually is. So again, I understand that this content is going to make some people upset, and it's going to go and fly directly against what everybody else is saying in the circle. But there's nothing I can do about that. All I can do is present to you guys the facts as they are, give you the truth as it is. And like I said, in all my videos, you'll see I'll have my sources listed in the description box below for you guys to take a look at, and for you guys to, audit me. Because at the end of the day, I'm living in the real world, I'm living real life, and these are things that affect real life. And again, a lot of other influencers in the preparedness realm refuse to talk about it. They can't talk about it because, again, it goes against their narrative of, clickbait, goes against their narrative of likes and algorithmic plays in order to maximize monetization. And as you guys know, this channel's never been about that. So just a forewarning, it's going to make a lot of people upset, and my subsequent videos are going to make a lot of people upset, and that's fine. I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comment section below. But this video is strictly just brass tacks of the factual things that we have encountered in the past when it comes to food registration, what we're looking at currently, and then what we can expect to see in the future using the historic precedents. So let's get started. So the first thing that I want to talk about is obviously premise registration. As we see in Wisconsin with the WLIC, which stands for the Wisconsin Livestock Identification Consortium, we can see this is already happening. This is alive and well, and this is done and they're incorporating this. This is the first one that we've seen as a nation here in Wisconsin of all livestock needing to be registered, identified, and it's everything from cattle to poultry. And so anything that's considered a livestock animal, whether you have one of them or many of them, whether you're commercial or a hobbyist, or whether your chicken is a pet, must be now registered. And so, and this isn't something super new. This has actually been going on for a couple of years. But as we can see, with the push of governmental interest, this has become another I guess within the sphere, people are catching on, because now you can see that there is a governmental interest in which is pushing hey, this is what our laws are, so we really need everybody to get on the ball with this. And so we're starting to see there are some pushback. We do see that there is exemptions for religious cases, but like with any exemption, you still have to register. So whether you're registering a non-exemption or you're actually registering an animal, you're either way you're registering. So to that tone, they can say, okay, well, Farmer Joe put in a religious exemption and his address is this and his name is this, and he says he doesn't want to register his livestock. So we know that he does have livestock in which he doesn't want registered, and we know we have his address. So I think those exemptions have always been pretty comical in just that scheme, because whether you're registering your animals or you're choosing not to register your animals, there still is a registry. They still know you have animals, and so I always find that kind of amusing. But sticking to what we're seeing again, this is Wisconsin law. Again, all the sources will be in the description box below, and it says as far as premise registration, it is mandatory. And just a few of the things: cattle, other bovine animals, swine, poultry, sheep, goats, horses, and other equine animals, farm-raised deer, game birds, including pheasants, quail, wild turkeys, migrating waterfowl, pigeons, exotic birds raised in captivity, whatever that means, bison, llamas, um, emus, ostriches, fish. And again, what are fish, right? That's extremely generic. Are we talking about people raising, you know, tilapia in their aquaponic systems, or are we really talking about, Jimmy's goldfish? Again, it's vague. We don't know. But when in doubt, register. And again, I'm just telling you exactly what it is. I'm just reading directly verbatim from the transcript here, directly from the Wisconsin governmental page here. And premises would include farms, hobby farms, veterinary clinics, hospitals, stables, animal hospital facilities, animal markets, livestock feedlots, animal trucker and dealer premises where animals are kept, slaughtering and rendering of dead animal plants, livestock exhibitions, and any other location where livestock is kept or congregated. So everything. And then if you look at the form, again, this is all being the sources below. I actually pulled up the forms, looked at them, and they have primary residence, secondary residence, third residence. Like, they want to know the premises of which, first, second, third, fourth, etc. And so it's very interesting. They are, again, it's very unique in scope, and not only that, it's very detailed. And obviously, if you look at the proponents of this case law, it really comes down to they say it's for animal welfare. They say they want to be able to track disease processes, etc. Again, I'm not here to give you my opinion on the matter. I'm just here to tell you what is, right? So regardless of how I feel about this piece of legislation, it's irrelevant. It exists. It's there. Wisconsin, got to deal with it. So that's just the facts of what we're seeing. And again, this is not a new idea, right? And if we go up to the very beginning, it says that this legislation was passed in its earliest form in early 2004, right? So we're 2000. I mean, you got to think this has been going on for quite some time. So, I mean, we're looking at almost 18, 19 years approximately. This has been going on. So this is not a new idea here in the U.S. Now, what is interesting is this being now expanding, right? So you have Wisconsin that wants to. Well, what happens if New Hampshire, Vermont, New York? What happens if these other states want to start to test the waters or really start some kind of premise registration? And what's interesting with this is most states do have some type of registration processes. Like, I know in several states, it may not be for all livestock, but definitely your sheep, goats, and cattle must be registered and tagged. Other places, it's not uncommon for your horses, if you have horses, that they must be tagged, right, and registered. And as we get further into it, we'll see, and we'll start talking about things like farms and other things like that. We do see that there is a precedence for this. And again, with this premise registration, it's unique in scope. This is, obviously one of the places where we have the most intense laws regarding this, and it's very in depth. But again, this is not the only state that has some type of premise registration. This is the only one, I believe, that has one to this level. Again, most states have registration and paperwork, and then obviously when you want to move livestock across state lines, every state that I'm aware of has laws regarding the movement of animals from one state to another or going through a state, right? There are permits that are required. I know I had to do that when I moved my homestead. So again, this idea of registration is not new, but this is very unique in its scope, and we can expect to see other states start to do the same thing, or We can even expect in the future maybe a federal, update, because as we're going to get into in another video, just very quickly, we're seeing again avian flu, mad cow disease. We were starting to see a concern from federal entities regarding different disease processes or viruses that can be transmitted from animal to animal, animal to human. So again, it would not surprise me if the federal government put out some kind of legislative laws that they wanted to enact. We're seeing this in the UK right now with people that have backyard chickens. So again, this idea of registry is not new, and we are seeing it actively in the United States being pushed to a varying degree that we really haven't seen in the past. So something to keep an eye on. But this is just one part of food, right? Animals are one part of food. So now let's start talking about plants a little bit. Talking about plants real quick. So as you guys know, again, this is nothing new. Most of you guys know this already. The USDA is recommending that people register their gardens. They're really encouraging it. In fact, if we listen to the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, he says, we welcome gardens nationwide joining us, the People's Garden effort, and all it represents, People's Garden, wherever you heard similar, terminology like that before, right? It shows you how to register, and it's really pushing the benefit of collaborative effort, community conservation practices, educating the public, helping minority communities, all these different things. And again, I'm not saying I'm all for all that stuff. I think the interesting thing is, though, when it comes to a registry, is what are going to be the future effects. I've done a video on that. I'll post that video in the link below, in the description box below. But ultimately, this opens up a lot of different avenues for conversation, right? And again, from a historical preference, what have we seen? I can tell you what I've seen from local governments. Let's take dog registration, right? A lot of places you got to register your pet dog, right? So you register your pet dog. Next thing you know it, but okay, well, you have to register your pet dog, and every year you have to renew your license. And so now that we know you have a dog, you got to renew your license for $10, $15, $30, what have you. So now you have a constant influx of revenue from people that are doing the right thing and registering their dogs. Again, this is a voluntarily thing, and I'm not trying to make it out to be more than what it really is. But what happens if you have an entity that's like, hey, we're registering gardens. We know that there are 10,000 gardens in the Austin, Texas area. Okay, perfect. Well, other companies can use that information too. The water companies are like, okay, well, for people that have gardens at their home, we're going to charge a surcharge of $10 per residence, and we can easily do that because of water shortages. I mean, again, we go back to the very beginning, right? The legal aspects of this are very vast, So, hey, well, we notice you have a garden, we know you have a registered garden, so it's going to be $10 extra surcharge on your water bill, and that's just to help us be able to provide infrastructure for you, right? So again, there's really a lot of good things that this registry can be used for, and also things that may be good for companies but may not be the best for individual people, right? Because it almost feels like, okay, well, if I register my garden now, I'm kind of being penalized and being paid more than my neighbor who has a garden but isn't registered, right? So again, I'm not saying that's going to happen in this case, but we have seen historically where you have voluntary registration that leads to payment in the future, or additional I don't want to say consequences, but essentially additional administrative steps that have to be taken in the future. Again, not my opinion. This is just the factual world we live in. So again, we are seeing that there is, this is being looked at. The registering of gardens is being looked at. And also, let's keep in mind, and I'm going to talk about this again as we go out, but the right to garden is not a thing that most places allow. A lot of people don't realize that. In fact, if we look in, and we'll bring this up again, but if we look in two places, let's look at Florida, 2019, everybody's aware, not everybody, but a lot of people aren't aware that 2019, the Florida statute 604.71 was finally enacted, and that gives a right for people to grow food and in the entire state of Florida, to where they can grow food and there's no laws, whether they're local, municipal, county, whatever, that can violate somebody's right to grow food. And this case stems from a Florida couple that was growing food in their front yard. And so their local municipality says you can't have a garden in your front yard like we've had it for all these years. And they start getting fined every single day. So this is a real instance where the city fined somebody for growing food in their front yard. It's a real thing. This really happens. Again, this is not my opinion on the matter. This is not about what I feel. This is just a factual reality that we live in. So, you know, when we start to look at the registration processes and we start to look at all these things and we look at it, you know, proactively, we can see that, okay, well, number one, most places you don't have a right to grow food. So let's keep that in front and center, right? Again, Florida 2019, and then in Maine 2021, it was, I want to make sure I got this correct, 2021 Section 25 of the Maine Constitution allowed people to have food sovereignty, allowed people to grow food for themselves. And they stated that is a human right. So we have two states. There's 50 states, and to my knowledge, those are the only two states that have in their state law, on the state level, some kind of semblance of food sovereignty. So again, the first thing we have to realize from a registry standpoint is there's only two states that have any kind of laws that help support the idea of food sovereignty, first off. And other than that, you may be in a place where it's illegal for you to grow your own food. So again, the idea of a registry, it makes sense. It makes complete sense from a historical perspective, from a now perspective, and then what we're seeing with case law as it's being divvied out nationwide. Again, not my opinion, not my beliefs, reality. So that's something to look at. So again, when we're talking about, when we're talking about vegetables, even when we're talking about gardens, realize most places it's illegal. There's a lot of places where it is illegal or there's strict regulations on it. And then again, even with that, there are some places that still require permitting, whether that's on a local level, county level, state level. And then you have the federal government now encouraging people to register. So again, all factual, all currently happening. So it's important things to just be aware of and be cognizant of. All right, number 3, let's really dive into the KSL a little bit. We're going to talk more about the USDA, especially the FDA, and really get a better understanding of what expectations we can see as we go down concurrently with other food registry items that need to be addressed.
So, what is a farm? Well, the FDA and USDA have very specific definitions of what a farm is. That is any place from which $1,000 or more of agricultural products were produced and sold, or normally would have been sold during the year. This is not changed to determine what local, county, or state law ordinances define what a farm is. So, a couple things to break down here. $1,000 is not hard to get to. So, first case, Farmer Brown goes, has an acre field, plows it, or has a bunch of fruit trees in it, whatever, produces $1,100 worth of agricultural products in 2020, considered a farm. You buy the farm in 2023, you do no farming on it, still could be considered a farm because it has a historic precedence of being able to produce that much. Another thing to think about, scope and size. Let's just take your standard aquaponics system, right? Like an indoor window aquaponics system that has 2 trays that are 2 feet by 2 feet, right? Organic lettuce goes for, $4 to $5 a head of lettuce. So with those 2 grow beds, you can easily put 10 in each. So you're producing 20 heads of lettuce, and aquaponics can generally produce lettuce every, 2, maybe 3 weeks tops. So that would mean you would just need those trays to produce 1 time a month the lettuce inside, 20 heads of lettuce, to get you to $1,000. Is that considered a farm, even though it's literally a window unit? Again, this is not my opinion. This is the reality that we find ourselves in. So it's very vague. And then to caveat that point, that's what the USDA and FDA considers to be a farm. Every local municipality, county, or state may have a different definition. And again, that may determine if your farm or window aquaponics system needs to have some kind of registry. And the fact that you're incorporating fish may require the registry in and of itself. again, aquaculture in many places is considered to be illegal and is considered to have to be registered. So again, these are all very interesting conversations that, again, I don't want to say it's a gray area because I think the laws are very specific on them. But in the future, and as far as what it means to the individual person trying to gain food sovereignty, yeah, it can be gray in that regards as to the implications of what it is to grow food. So again, we use different words for different things, right? What many people in the preparedness community would consider a homestead, the government clearly defines as a farm, and vice versa. And realistically, the verbiage that we use is irrelevant when it comes to case law and when it comes to governmental interest. So there we have it with that. That's a farm. I know it is clear as mud there. Now let's talk about something I find very, very interesting, and that is the historical precedents for food registry. This is really exciting. This is really interesting stuff. So let's take a look at that. So as it relates to historical precedents of food registry in the United States in the past, we definitely see clear patterns and templates that the government has used regarding food, regarding its interest in food and food registration. So what we first saw in World War I is the government tried to encourage people to curb consuming certain what's considered food luxuries such as meat, sugar, and oils. And so we saw that there was a push, whether some people want to call that propaganda, some people want to call it just good public policy. It's not for me to determine. I'm just here to give you the facts. But there was a governmental push and interest to discourage people from consuming certain food products because of the war effort that was ongoing. Then we saw later in World War II that food rationing books, stamps, cards, and tokens were put into place by the Office of Price Administration, OPM as it was referred to. And these were in fact a food registry because a lot of these stamps and books were serialized. And then the tokens and cards were serialized, and then tokens were only given to certain individuals for certain things, etc. And there was so many in circulation, so they were all a food registry item. And so this is where we can see a clear-cut precedence that we needed a food registry, and a food registry was not only important, but it was worth enforcing, as we'll talk about that a little more in the future. But the problem that OPM ran into were, number one, black markets, and then number two, the black markets of the actual stamps. In fact, OPM discouraged vendors from taking stamps or cards that weren't already attached to the book, like you had to rip it from the book. And the big argument, if you look at different historians and people of that day, were that these books that the government created were so poorly put together that stamps would fall out of them willy-nilly. They would come already separated and manufactured from the book, and so that caused a lot of issues. We noticed that was an issue back then. That would not be an issue today, and we'll obviously talk about those issues. But brass tacks, we have seen historically the governmental interest in food registry. It's 100%. I mean, that's not open to interpretation. That's not open for debate. We can debate it if you like, but the fact is, it actually happened. And OPM, the purpose of OPM was to create these food rationing systems that were serialized and that were a food registry. So those are the facts as they are. That is the historical preference in a nutshell. Obviously, there's deeper things to talk about here, but as far as our conversation today, as far as food registry goes, yes, there is a historical precedence for a government to take governmental interest in registering food. All right, let's move on to let's talk about black markets and these industries and what we could be facing and looking at. So when we talk about black market food industries, these include a very different the demographics of industries and people, things like that. But the most common ones that we see, right, are food industries for the rich and famous. For example, in 2005, the United States Fish and Wildlife Services banned the import of fancy fish eggs, like certain sturgeons and stuff like that, of animals that are considered to be endangered, things like that. So using their fish eggs for caviar, for example, importing that in the United States is a crime, is illegal. But we still see these happening. There's many news articles about different high-end restaurants in big epicenters, LA, New York City, that still will import these, for example, fish eggs, these caviars for their clientele. We've even seen chefs talk about, for example, piranhas. I'm not sure exactly I know the legislation has kind of changed a little bit, but for the longest time, and it still may be this way, you can't import live piranhas into the United States of America, but frozen ones can be imported for food consumption if you have the right licensing and permitting, etc. So we do see that if there's a black market for food industries within the upper echelons of society, the rich, the famous, the people who can pay the high dollar for these more exotic food endeavors. Now, that's one. The second black market we see is food processors, butchers who sell animal products without permits. Obviously, you have custom meat exemption, but that just means that if somebody brings the animal to you, you can harvest it for them. But what you can't do is, go out, buy your own cow, harvest it, and then sell it out of your butcher shop. You would need to have licensing with FDA, USDA, local, state. It gets pretty intense pretty quick. So we do see that those black markets, they still exist. They're still out there. But that would be another black market food entity. Next, hunters who sell wild game. According to the USDA, wild game cannot be sold for consumption. However, there are places that do, I don't want to say domestic, but they have big, preserves that are completely fenced off where, deer, elk are maintained, and they're not considered to be wild because they're not free. They're stuck within a captivity type environment. And so there are certain exemptions for them. But wild game hunting, again, you can't sell wild elk meat that you shot according to the USDA. So hunters that would then sell that meat would be another black market that we see propped up. Another one we see is resellers of food, right? And this is usually under theft, illegal transportation, and against certain law. So resellers of food. Recently, we've seen, for example, a black market of baby formula, right? We saw the big issues that we've been having, especially this last year with baby formula. You've seen a lot of runners from Mexico bring over baby formula that can be sold on the black market here in the United States of America because of our shortages. Because, again, there are certain laws and health regulations that are set up in the United States of America that said, hey, we're putting a hold on baby formula for whatever reason. And then you have mothers that need baby formula. So naturally, this vacuum opens up. And now there is a demand, there will be a supply. So we have seen these black markets pop up, for example, very recently with baby formula. So again, these food resellers are considered to be another black market industry. Now let's talk about another one that's more interesting and probably more towards, what your local person in preparedness may necessarily care about. And that is legitimate companies or legitimate people, whether you have your own farm or whatever, legitimate people selling outside of their charter. And what does that mean? Well, we've seen with Amos Miller versus USDA, organic farmer, Amish man in Pennsylvania, arrested, fined, held in prison, held in jail. And so we have seen in this particular case that, the government did have an interest in shutting down his organic farm, not because, necessarily that there was a complaint or people upset, but because he was going against his charter. He was going outside the laws and regulations that are set forth. We see a lot of this too with tax evasion. For example, what we see every day here in the United States of America. Let's take marijuana, right? A lot of places you can grow marijuana medicinally. You can get the permitting for marijuana. So a great example of this is you have a farm, which is funny because Oklahoma and Oregon are the number one producers of marijuana here in the United States of America. So let's just say you have a farm in either Oklahoma or Oregon, and it's 100 acres. And so you are producing 100 acres of marijuana. Well, if you report 75% of those acres to the government, get the taxes, do everything the right way, okay, cool. But then you have 25%. What do you do with the other 25%? Well, if you were to transport this across state lines, which is illegal, to this other state, they're going to pay you more than what you would make off of the 75 acres that you are legally, giving to the state of Oklahoma or the state of Oregon. And so you can see in this case, You can see where you have it's a black market. You have a legitimate company doing some legitimate things, but then there's other things that they're doing illegitimately in order to make more money, evade taxes, because of the laws, etc. And this can apply to food as well. Again, we talked about earlier how moving livestock animals across state lines can be a crime if you don't have the right permitting. So again, these are things that, these are things to take into, these are things to realize, right? Because as more and more people are wanting food, and this becomes a commodity which people are wanting, and it becomes a hot commodity like we've already seen the historical precedents for during World War I and World War II, you're going to see black markets open up. And not only are you going to see black markets open up, you're going to see them become alive and well and operating, freely. And so, again, these are all things to take a look at. These are the various black markets. There's definitely more, right? Another great example off the top of my head is horse meat. Cannot consume horse meat here in the United States of America, but there are people that still go get horses to do that practice, sometimes even stealing them. So again, we see this happening concurrently, actively here in the United States of America, and you can expect as the demand for food increases, as we've already seen with baby formula, will increase with the current demand, which a reasonable person would expect the historical precedents and templates that we've already seen of food registration to open up and become alive and well. Again, I'm not saying because I know it's going to happen in the future. I just know the government has showed a governmental interest in the past to do it, and we are seeing it currently happening here in the United States of America, whether we're talking about growing gardens, whether we're talking about this Wisconsin premise registration. Again, we're seeing it happening in real time. So let's talk about what happens next. What's going to happen next? Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know exactly what's going to happen step by step, but what I can say is by looking at the historical markers that we've seen, looking at what's currently happening, and then looking at what we are promised is going to happen in the future, I think we can reasonably, expect certain things to happen. So let's look at the history. So historically speaking, again, everything that I say has sources for in the description box below. Historically, we saw that the OPA enforced actions against 280,724 violators of rationing and price laws throughout the years of the war. All right, penalties went as far as 1 year in prison and a $5,000 fine. And also, this is very interesting, 1 in 15 businesses. I said it, yep, I'll say it again. 1 in 15 businesses, wholesale, retail, and service businesses were charged with illicit transactions. So it's clear that the OPA didn't just sit around and didn't do anything. It's very clear that they were actively enforcing these laws and trying to ensure that the economy, the wartime economy, was kept up with in accordance with their laws. So just briefly meaning capitalism still occurred and the government was willing to take action. Again, capitalism was still occurring and government was willing to take action. So that shows you the government, even back then with the OPA, they were 110% willing to take action. They did take action. They took action against more than 280,000 people, more than 1 in 15 businesses. And that just shows you how prevalent it is. And so if it was that prevalent then, I can only imagine what we're going to see nowadays. Now, here's the big difference that we have to keep in mind. We understand the government has an interest. We understand historically what the government's willing to do with that government interest. We've seen that currently and in local time with Amos Miller versus USDA there in Pennsylvania, and there's many more. But we've seen what the government has done with raw milk. We've seen what they've done with Amos Miller again versus USDA. So we can actively see that the government does have an interest in ensuring that their laws are being maintained and upkept. And so what we can continue to see is to curb this, right? Governmental action currently is the continuation of registration and regulation. We see that. We know that. Look at it. Look at the case law. Look at all the regulations that are in place for agricultural commodity products. We know without a shadow of a doubt that registration and regulation are core tenets of FDA, USDA, and other subsidiary employment arms of the United States of America. So we know the continuation and registration and regulation of these industries will be in effect. We can expect more red tape, more bureaucracy, They're telling us it's coming. We are seeing it coming. Again, it's pretty cut and dry. So what we can expect to see, again, couple all the aforementioned, right? So couple all the legislation, all the continued regulation and registration, take all the continued black markets that are currently happening, take all the commodity issues that we're currently seeing, take the Wisconsin narrative, take the USDA narrative, take all these things into consideration, and then apply that to a digital currency. So apply all the aforementioned with additional currency and virtually unlimited computing power that the government can yield. That will put them in the upper hand in any market, legal or otherwise. So let me say that again. Couple all the aforementioned with a digital currency and virtually unlimited computing power, and the United States government will have an upper hand in any market, legal or otherwise. Again, you introduce a digital currency in which all transactions can be monitored, tracked, input is virtually unlimited computing power to be able to manage and track and formulate, algorithms to understand what these transactions mean. They will have the upper hand in any business endeavor you try to go on, legal or otherwise. And again, I'm not saying I have an opinion on this. I'm not telling you what my opinion is on this. I'm not telling you, how I feel about it. I'm just telling you the reality of the situation that, we find ourselves in. So again, we can expect with digital currency, they will be able to see everything, and they'll be able to determine, purchases and determine whether things are registered, not registered, and they will be able to determine if laws are being broken or if things are being circumnavigated around the current systems that they have in place. So the real question is, what becomes governmental interest? And that's unknown to us. That's the unknown. We can make assumptions. I can make plenty of assumptions of what governmental interest is. I think the laws in itself are 100% clear what the governmental interest is. But again, a lot of things, like we talked about earlier with the definitions, are vague. And so one day it could be okay, and the next day there is a governmental interest that says, well, technically you are trying to circumnavigate this. And that's just the truth that we find ourselves in. And anybody can be breaking any law at any time without even knowing. And again, ignorance of law is not affirmative defense. So, with that being said, what can we do? What can we do to ensure that us growing food in order to, preserve our lives is maintained? Well, I think that we've seen, like I said, two good state level attempts, right? I think, again, the 2019 Florida Statute 604.71 and the 2021 Section 25 of the Maine Constitution are great legislations for food sovereignty. However, outside of clear-cut regulation that protects food sovereignty, you can still expect there to be a governmental response, right? Because, again, we can say, okay, yeah, you can absolutely grow your own food. That's great. Yeah, we have a state law that, let's just say you do live in Florida, or let's say you do live in Maine. They're like, yeah, you can absolutely grow your own food. But it can only be for you. You can't share it with your mom and dad that are ill or that don't have the ability to grow their own food because they're old. You can't share with them. It's only for you. So that food can't leave your homestead. Okay, well, what if they come and stay with me? Well, did they grow the food? Like, there's so many different ways to look at this. And again, I'm not trying to be petty, but if we look at the case law, for example, we look at the Maine case law, you saw many industries against that bill. They're like, we are against this being added to the Constitution. You saw organizations that are like, no, we don't want this. Food organizations, like, no, we don't want this. Well, how can you advocate for gardening, but you can't advocate for people growing their own food because they didn't like the fact they had a right to it. They didn't like the fact that was being incorporated because of various different things. And I'm not saying that they don't have good reasons for it, but what I'm saying is, yes, there are two states that have what appear to be really great protections, but we don't know, because this hasn't been tested yet, where those protections go to. And again, that's the reality that we find ourselves in. And remember, in most states, you do not have a right to grow your own food. It's not a right, at least from a litigious standpoint. Now, we can all say we have, human rights in the Constitution, right to, freedom of speech, pursuit of happiness, all this other stuff. And by golly, a garden is my pursuit of happiness. That's fine, and we can make those rah-rah arguments. But if you find yourself in in court, I'm going to encourage you to have a little bit more than that. So again, that's where we're at. That's what we can foresee happening next. Again, This isn't my opinion on the matter. This is just the world that we find ourselves in. This is just the true factual world that we find ourselves in. Again, all my sources are in the description box below. But it's going to be very interesting. What happens next is going to be very interesting. And I don't think that there are enough people that know or even have the understanding to even be concerned to the level that that they claim to be. And again, it's not for me, right? I know what I got to do, and I know most of you guys think you know what you got to do, and that's really all that matters. But again, it comes down to a very interesting question. Will you register your food? And the truth is, if you buy your food at the grocery store, it's already registered. Well, there you go. If you guys like the video, and as always, guys, long live the Republic.